Hello again, everyone. Edwin Leonard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be dissertating and talking about astrology and pregnancy. Well, anyway, the first off, I'm going to talk about some possible pregnancy indicators for a natal chart. And anyway, first thing is for natal chart, I think what's important is to have the moon in a fertile sign or have a fertile sign on the fifth house cusp. Well, and a fertile sign is a water sign, Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces. Now, semi-fertile signs are Capricorn, Taurus, and Libra, so that would be next favorable. Now, also, thing is, now the semi-barren signs, which is the third most favorable, are Aries, Sagittarius, and Aquarius. The barren signs, which are not auspicious for pregnancy, are Gemini, Leo, and Virgo. It doesn't mean you wouldn't have kids with those signs in the moon sign and or the fifth house cusp, but it just means I think the chances might be a little more diminished as opposed to the other 9 zodiac signs. Now, the thing too is to look at some planets in your fifth house, and as they could be indicators. Now, if you have Jupiter in the fifth house, that could be very propitious and very favorable for children, especially if it has predominantly good aspects to it in your natal chart. Now, I think also what makes it even more favorable is if Jupiter is making the trine to your ascendant, because I think that would give you a little bit better health, and when you have better health, of course, then it's more favorable for having the child. Now, let's say you have Venus in the fifth. Well, Venus in the fifth could be auspicious and favorable as well. Saturn in the fifth house, however, may cause some difficulties with pregnancy. And as many of you may know, the Octomom woman who had all those children, she had in her chart. What was interesting is that she has in her chart she had Saturn in the fifth house. She had Cancer on the fifth house cusp, though. She had some difficulties as far as pregnancy goes. She had to resort to some unorthodox method. It was like vitro fertilization or something like that, but she wound up having them. Now, another thing to look at is as far as your natal chart goes. Also, if Uranus is in the fifth house, this might give something unusual connected with the pregnancy. You might wind up having maybe brilliant, ingenious children with Uranus in the fifth, but I think it could be an unanticipated pregnancy. You might have the child maybe way earlier or a lot later than you anticipated. So anyway, I thought was interesting. Another example, another thing to look at too, is when you have the planet in your fifth house, it could correspond or correlate somehow with the child you have. So, for example, let's take the actor Michael J. Fox's natal chart. Now, I understand men can't get pregnant, but you could maybe get an idea, conception, what kind of children he may have. Now, Michael J. Fox has Mercury in Cancer in the fifth house. He also has Cancer on the fifth house cusp. Now, the thing about it is, with Mercury, as you know, rules Gemini and it rules Virgo. So looking at this, okay, he has one child that has the sun in Gemini and has a Virgo rising. They're both Mercury ruled. It's interesting too, he has a set of twins. Now, Mercury rules Gemini, and the symbol of Gemini are the twins. And he also has another child that has the moon in Gemini. So basically what this is if you look at a planet, if you have a planet in your fifth house, that you might wind up having a child that has a sign connected with that planet that rules the planet that rules that sign. So it's interesting too is that my mom has she has Mercury in Sagittarius in her 5th house. And Mercury rules Gemini, and my moon is in Gemini. So basically, it's like if you have a planet in that 5th house, you might have a child that has the sign that is associated with that planet planet rules over. So it might a planet that might be how can I say this? Let me rewind and say this again. If somebody has, say, okay, they have a planet in their 5th house, they might have a child with a sign associated with that planet prominent in their natal chart, such as the sun, moon, or ascendant, is basically what I'm saying. So anyway, also it's important to look at you look at your chart, look at transits, because of course Jupiter transiting the 5th house, that could be auspicious for pregnancy, and especially if it makes predominantly good aspects. Some people may think it has to be unaffected, but the odds are you're going to have at least one adverse aspect to it. Transiting Jupiter conjunct the 5th house ruler is also, I'd see, as favorable. And also transit Jupiter conjunct the ascendant or 1st house cusp. Jupiter also, if you have Saturn transiting your natal 5th house, that could cause some difficulty in the pregnancy. Doesn't mean 100% you're not going to be pregnant if Saturn is transiting the 5th house, but it may cause some delay or some complication. Now, if Uranus is transiting your natal 5th house, this could cause perhaps an unanticipated or untimed pregnancy, and there might be something maybe unusual connected with the pregnancy, such as an exceptionally early child or an exceptionally late child. Now, also, Venus transiting the 5th can be auspicious as well, I believe. And another thing is, if transiting Jupiter is conjunct your natal moon, that could be another favorable time to have the pregnancy and or conception. Now, this also, another thing too, is when you look at, it's actually, from what my understanding is, what I just stated is might be more favorable for conception, but I think at the same time that could still indicate a good time as far as the pregnancy goes as well. If that aspect happens during the time at some point when you are pregnant, that could be a good indicator for a good pregnancy as well. Now, also, if Pluto is transiting your 5th house cusp, Pluto is transiting your 5th house, well, that could be an indicator for perhaps a strong fixation or obsession on perhaps having a child. So, and anyway, now another thing to look at is your progressed chart. Now, if your progressed moon, say, is in a water sign and or your 5th house cusp has a water sign on it, that could be beneficial and favorable for pregnancy and conception, I believe. Progressed Jupiter in the 5th house, progressed Venus in the 5th house as well. Now, if you have progressed moon in the 5th house, yes, that could be favorable and advantageous as well. Also, let's say you have the progressed moon conjunct the progressed ruler of the 5th house, that could be another positive aspect for pregnancy. If the progressed Jupiter is conjunct your progressed moon, that as well. If you have progressed Saturn in the 5th house, that could cause some complications with pregnancy. Progressed Uranus in your progressed 5th house, well, that could be, as I stated with the transit, it could indicate perhaps something unusual connected with the pregnancy. Maybe it could give you some brilliant, ingenious children. It could give you perhaps it might be an exceptionally early or exceptionally late baby, something or an unanticipated pregnancy. Also, if it progressed, you look at some other things too. I want to tell you before I end this that there were some books that could be recommended reading for pregnancy. Birth and Beyond is one of the titles. And then another title is The Art of Predictive Astrology, which I don't think is dedicated entirely to pregnancy and astrology, but it has that it talks about that to some degree in the book. And if my recommendation to you people out there is to look at do further reading on this, because I'm just basically talking about the fundamentals of astrology and pregnancy, and this is barely probably scratching the surface of it, and it's a very deep subject, and I would look into it more extensively if you are somebody that is planning on having a child, and this is a very in-depth type of subject. So really, that's what I would recommend, because like I said, it's very deep, and there's nothing superficial about this subject at all. And I would try to maybe do some online research, and or perhaps buy an astrology book that's associated with pregnancy and timing. And I think there's some kind of chart that you could look at. It's like a fertility chart or something connected with astrology. I forgot what it's entitled precisely, but you might want to Google and search that as well. Well, anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for astrology and pregnancy, and stay tuned next time, where I'll be dissertating and talking about, well, actually, I'll be continuing my transit series, transits in the houses. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone. Because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart, and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.